I never thought sorting through my father's belongings would destroy everything I believed about my family. But there I was 3 weeks after we buried him, holding a letter that would shatter the carefully constructed world we'd all lived in for decades. My hands were shaking as I read the faded handwriting. The paper was yellowed with age, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn thin. It was dated June 15, 1987, 38 years ago, and it was from a woman named Catherine Miller, telling my father that their daughter, Sophie, had just turned 16. Their daughter. My father's daughter. My sister. I sat down hard on the leather chair behind Dad's desk, the same chair where he'd spent countless evenings going over his accounting books, where he'd helped me with homework, where he'd written checks for my college tuition. The same desk where he'd apparently hidden this secret for almost 4 decades. My name is Ella Morrison. I'm 42 years old, an art teacher at Jefferson High School, married to my husband David for 18 years, mother to 2 beautiful teenagers. I've always been the responsible one, the dutiful daughter who visited every Sunday, who organized Dad's medications after Mom passed away 5 years ago, who held his hand during those final days in the hospital when lung cancer took him from us. And now I was holding proof that my entire family history was a lie. The letter wasn't long. Catherine's words were careful, almost apologetic. She wasn't asking for money or making demands. She just wanted Dad to know that Sophie was doing well, that she'd made the honor roll, that she had his eyes and his talent for mathematics. She thanked him for the monthly support he'd been sending, said it had made all the difference in their lives. She signed it with gratitude and fondness and included a school photo of a smiling teenage girl with dark curly hair and yes, eyes that looked exactly like my father's. Exactly like mine. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were the words Sophie Marie Miller, age 16. June 1987. My father, the man everyone in our community respected, who served on the church board for 20 years, who never missed one of my school events, who told me every day that I was his princess, his only child, his everything. That man had another daughter. And he'd never said a word. I'd come to Dad's house that Saturday morning with my brother Marcus. Well, Marcus wasn't technically my brother. He was my cousin, but Dad had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when Marcus was 8. That made Marcus family in every way that mattered. We'd grown up as siblings fighting over the TV remote, sharing secrets, protecting each other. At 39, Marcus was now a successful contractor with his own business, and he'd taken the morning off to help me sort through Dad's things. Ella? You okay up there? Marcus's voice floated up from the living room where he was boxing up books. You've been quiet for like 20 minutes. I couldn't answer. I was staring at a second photo I'd found in the same envelope. This one showed a younger version of my father, maybe in his early 30s, standing next to a beautiful woman with long auburn hair. They were at what looked like a county fair, both holding cotton candy, both smiling like people do when they're genuinely happy. The woman must have been Catherine. And based on the date written on the back, August 1970, this was a year before my parents got married. Except my parents got married in June 1970. I'd seen the wedding photos 1,000 times. Mom in her simple white dress with the lace sleeves, Dad in his gray suit, both of them standing outside the courthouse because they'd eloped without telling anyone. Unless they hadn't. Unless everything about my parents' relationship was different than what I'd been told. Ella. Marcus appeared in the doorway of Dad's study, his expression shifting from curious to concerned when he saw my face. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I handed him the letter without a word. I watched his eyes move across the lines, saw the exact moment when understanding hit him. His jaw went slack, and he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal. Confusion. Hurt. He had another kid, Marcus said, his voice flat. Uncle Richard had another daughter. Apparently. My own voice sounded strange to my ears, distant and cold. A daughter he supported financially. A daughter he kept photos of. A daughter he hid from all of us. Marcus sat down on the old couch Dad kept in his study, still holding the letter. Mom never said anything. Aunt Margaret never mentioned. Mom probably didn't know. Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. My mother had been many things, devoted, traditional, sometimes passive, but she wasn't stupid. Could she really have been married to Dad for 42 years and never suspected? The postmark on this letter is from an address in Portland. That's 3 hours away. Maybe that's where he went on all those business trips, Marcus said quietly. Remember? He was always driving to Portland for work. Sometimes he'd be gone for a whole weekend. The memory hit me like a punch to the stomach. Dad had gone to Portland at least once a month for as long as I could remember. He said it was for client meetings. He worked as an independent accountant and claimed he had several big clients there who preferred face-to-face consultations. Mom never questioned it. Neither did I. Why would we? I opened the desk drawer where I'd found the letter. It had been stuck in the back, wedged behind a stack of old tax returns. I started pulling out more files, searching for anything else Dad might have hidden. And that's when I found them. Bank statements. Dozens of them dating back decades, for an account I'd never known existed. Marcus, look at this. I spread the statements across the desk. They showed monthly withdrawals of $500, then later $1,000, then $1,500 as the years went on. Always on the first of the month. Always noted as cash withdrawal. The account was in Dad's name only, opened in 1971, the year I was born. He was sending her money, Marcus said. For 30 years. Maybe longer. Even after Sophie would have been grown. I pulled out the most recent statement I could find, dated just 6 months before Dad's diagnosis. The account still had over $30,000 in it. He was still putting money in this account right up until he got sick. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my brother-in-law, probably asking when I'd be home. I'd promised David I'd be back by lunch. We were supposed to take our daughter Emma to look at colleges this afternoon. Normal Saturday plans for a normal family. Except nothing about my family was normal anymore. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. It was the question, wasn't it? What was I supposed to do with this information? Dad was gone. Confronting him wasn't an option. I could shove the letter back in the drawer, pretend I'd never seen it, let the secret die with him. That's probably what he would have wanted. My father was a man who valued privacy, who kept his feelings close, who believed some things were better left unsaid. But there was a woman out there. Sophie. She'd be 54 years old now. She'd grown up knowing her father sent money but never claimed her publicly. She'd lived her entire life as a secret. And somewhere, there might be a woman named Catherine Miller who'd loved my father enough to keep his secret all these years. Didn't they deserve to be acknowledged? Didn't Sophie deserve to know that her father had died, if she didn't already? And what about my own mother? Resting in the cemetery next to the man she'd married. Had she known? Had she spent her entire marriage aware that her husband had another family, another daughter, another life she wasn't part of? Or had she been as deceived as the rest of us? I need to find her, I heard myself say. I need to find Sophie. Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested burning down the house. Ella, are you sure? Maybe Dad kept this secret for a reason. Maybe this Sophie person doesn't want to be found. Maybe she's got her own life and doesn't need us showing up and... She's my sister, Marcus. The words hung in the air between us. My sister. I'd always wanted a sister growing up. I'd begged my parents for a little sister, even though by the time I was old enough to understand, Mom had made it clear there wouldn't be more children. She'd had complications during my birth. That's what they told me. Now I wondered if that was another lie. Or if it was true and that's why Dad had already moved on to another relationship. I picked up the photo of teenage Sophie again. She looked happy in the picture, wearing a school uniform, her smile bright and genuine. What had her life been like? Did she resent her father for keeping her hidden? Did she have half-siblings she'd never met? Did she ever stand at her window on Christmas mornings and wonder what her father was doing with his real family? Okay, Marcus said finally. Okay. If you're going to do this, I'm helping you. We'll find her together. But Ella, you need to prepare yourself. This might not have a happy ending. This Sophie person might not want anything to do with us. She might be angry or bitter or she might be glad to know she's not alone anymore. I gathered the papers, the photos, the letter, and put them carefully in a folder. Dad's memorial service is in 2 weeks. If I can find her before then, maybe she'd want to come. Maybe she deserves to say goodbye too. I didn't tell Marcus that I was already thinking beyond the memorial service. I was thinking about the house we were standing in, the house Dad had left to me in his will. The house that, according to the terms Dad had set up, was mine to do with as I pleased. No one else in the family was supposed to inherit anything except some small savings bonds and personal items. Dad had been very specific about that. At the time I thought it was because I'd been the one taking care of him. I was the one who'd driven him to chemo appointments, who'd moved into the guest room during his final months, who'd sat with him through the long nights when the pain was too much. I'd thought the house was a thank you, a recognition of my devotion. Now I wondered if it was guilt money. If Dad had left me everything because he knew what I was going to find in his desk. If this was his way of apologizing without actually having to say the words. Let's start with the address on the letter, I said, pulling out my phone. It's old, but maybe we can trace Catherine Miller. If she's still alive, she might know where Sophie is. Marcus nodded and started taking pictures of the documents with his phone. I'll run some searches when I get home. I've got a buddy who works in real estate. He can access property records, see if anyone by that name still lives in Portland. We worked in silence for a while, going through the rest of Dad's desk more carefully now, looking for any other secrets he might have hidden. We found old receipts from restaurants in Portland, ticket stubs from a movie theater I'd never heard of, a birthday card signed with Love C. That had been tucked inside a book on the shelf. My father had lived a double life. The weight of that realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. How had he done it? How had he come home from those Portland weekends and kissed my mother and asked about my school week and helped me with my geometry homework, all while carrying the knowledge that he had another daughter somewhere else? Found something else, Marcus said. He was holding a small leather-bound notebook, the kind Dad used to keep in his pocket. It's like an address book, but it only has a few numbers in it. And look, there's a C. Miller listed here with a Portland number. I took the notebook from him, my heart pounding. The number had been written in Dad's neat handwriting, along with an address that matched the one on the letter. But someone had drawn a line through the address and written a new one below it. And below that, another crossed-out address and another new one. The trail of addresses went down the page, the last one added in what looked like much more recent ink. He kept track of her, I whispered. Every time she moved, he updated his records. He was following her life. Or staying in contact, Marcus pointed out. Ella, that last address was written recently. Look at the ink, it's not faded like the others. That means Dad knew where Catherine Miller was living up until. He paused, not wanting to say it. Up until he died. I finished for him. He was in contact with her until the end. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. During those final weeks when I'd been sleeping on a cot next to Dad's hospital bed, when I'd been holding his hand and telling him it was okay to let go, when I'd been promising him that I'd take care of everything, had he been thinking about Catherine? About Sophie? Had he been carrying the guilt of leaving them behind too? Or had he called them? Had he said goodbye to them in a way he'd never said goodbye to us? I felt sick. My perfect father, my role model, the man I'd tried to make proud with every decision I'd made. He was a stranger. He'd been a stranger all along, and I'd been too blind to see it. I need some air, I said abruptly, standing up. The study suddenly felt too small, too full of ghosts and lies. I walked downstairs and out onto the front porch, breathing in the October air. The maple tree in the front yard was dropping leaves, covering the lawn in orange and red. Dad used to love this time of year. He'd rake the leaves into huge piles so I could jump in them when I was little. Had Sophie jumped in leaf piles? Had Dad raked them for her too? Marcus followed me outside and sat down on the porch steps. You know what bothers me most? He said quietly. I wasn't even his real son. I was his nephew. He took me in after my parents died, and I've spent my whole life being grateful for that, trying to live up to what I thought he wanted me to be. And now I find out he had another kid he was supporting, another family he was visiting, and he never once thought to mention it. Not even to you, his actual daughter. Maybe he was ashamed, I offered, though the words felt hollow. Shame doesn't last 30 years, Ella. Shame doesn't make you keep detailed records and update addresses and hide bank accounts. That's not shame. That's choice. Uncle Richard chose to live a double life. He chose it every single day for decades. Marcus was right. And that made it worse somehow. This wasn't a one-time mistake, a youthful indiscretion, a moment of weakness. This was a deliberate, ongoing deception that my father had maintained for nearly 40 years. He'd looked Mom in the eye every single day of their marriage and lied. He'd hugged me and told me I was his special girl while knowing there was another girl, another daughter, who he was also supporting and caring for from a distance. I'm still going to find her, I said. Even if she hates us. Even if she wants nothing to do with me. She deserves to know. Know what exactly? Marcus asked. That her father is dead? Or that she had a family she was never allowed to be part of? Both, I thought. Everything. The whole truth, whatever that turned out to be. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number from Dad's address book. My hands were shaking as I listened to it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then a woman's voice, older, tired sounding. Hello. Hello, is this Catherine Miller? My voice came out steadier than I expected. There was a pause. Who's asking? My name is Ella Morrison. My father was Richard Morrison. I found a letter in his desk. From 1987. About a daughter named Sophie. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard a shaky breath. Oh my God, he told you. He finally told you. He didn't tell me anything, I said, and my voice cracked. He died 3 weeks ago. I found the letter while cleaning out his house. Another long pause. Then, Richard is dead? Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you'd heard. I heard what might have been crying on the other end, soft and quickly muffled. I knew something was wrong, Catherine said finally. The money stopped coming 6 months ago. Richard was always so reliable. I thought maybe he'd finally decided to cut ties, or that his wife had found out, but I never imagined he was sick. Lung cancer, I said. It was fast. By the time they caught it, there wasn't much they could do. I'm sorry for your loss, Catherine said, and she sounded like she meant it. I know this must be a shock for you. Finding out about us. That's an understatement. I watched a car drive by, its occupants probably on their way to do normal Saturday errands, completely unaware that my entire world had just been turned upside down. I need to ask you something. Did my mother know? About you and Sophie? I don't think so, Catherine said slowly. Richard always said she didn't. He said telling her would destroy her, that she'd been through so much already with her health problems and losing the ability to have more children. He said keeping our relationship private was the kindest thing to do. Your relationship? I repeated. You were in a relationship with my father? Ella, I think you and I need to talk in person. This isn't a conversation for the phone. There's a lot you don't know and I think you deserve to hear the whole story. So does Sophie. Sophie, I said. My sister. Where is she? Can I meet her? She lives about an hour from me now. She's married, has 2 kids of her own. She's a mathematics professor at Portland State University. Catherine's voice softened with pride. Richard would have been so proud of her. She got his mind for numbers. I felt a strange pang of jealousy. My father had never gotten to see Sophie's children, his grandchildren. Or had he? Had there been more lies, more secret trips, more hidden relationships? I want to meet her, I said. Both of you. I'm planning a memorial service for Dad in 2 weeks. I think you should be there. I think Sophie should be there. Ella, I don't know if that's a good idea. Your father kept us separate for a reason. Bringing us together now might cause more pain than. He's gone, I interrupted. The secret doesn't need to be kept anymore. I'm his daughter, and I'm asking you to come to my father's memorial service. Please. I think he would have wanted that, even if he was too cowardly to make it happen while he was alive. The word cowardly hung in the air. I'd never called my father a coward before. I'd never even thought of him that way. But what else do you call a man who hides parts of his life because he's afraid of the consequences? I'll talk to Sophie, Catherine said finally. I'll explain what happened, that you found the letter, that you want to meet. But Ella, I can't make any promises. Sophie has had a complicated relationship with the idea of her father. She spent her whole life knowing he existed but couldn't acknowledge her publicly. This might be too much for her. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. How could I understand what it was like to be Sophie, to be the secret child, the one who was loved from a distance but never claimed? But I'm going to try. I have to try. We exchanged information. Catherine gave me her current address and said I could visit the next day if I wanted. She'd call Sophie and see if she'd be willing to meet as well. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately felt like I might throw up. You did it, Marcus said, looking at me with something like awe. You actually called her. I don't know if I did the right thing, I admitted. Maybe Marcus, maybe I should have left it alone. Maybe Dad knew what he was doing. Dad hid a daughter for 40 years, Marcus said flatly. He doesn't get credit for knowing what he was doing. Come on, let's finish up here and get you home. You need to talk to David about this before you drive to Portland tomorrow. David, my husband, the man I'd promised to share everything with, to never keep secrets from, to build a life of honesty and trust with. How was I going to explain to him that my father, the man he'd respected and admired, had been living a lie for decades? How was I going to explain that I now had a sister I'd never met, a sister who might want nothing to do with me? We spent another hour going through Dad's things, but the joy had gone out of it. Everything felt tainted now. Every photo, every memento, every carefully preserved memory. I couldn't look at any of it without wondering what else Dad had been hiding. Were there more secrets in this house? More lies buried in drawers and closets? I took the folder of documents with me when we left. Marcus hugged me in the driveway, holding on longer than usual. Whatever happens, he said, we're still family. We grew up together. That doesn't change. But it did change, I thought as I drove home. Changed everything. Because family was supposed to be about truth and trust, and I just learned that our family had been built on lies. David was in the kitchen when I got home, making sandwiches for lunch. Our daughter Emma was at the table scrolling through her phone, probably looking at more college websites. Our son Jake was in the living room playing video games. Normal. Everything looked so blissfully normal. Hey honey, David said, smiling at me. Then his smile faded when he saw my face. What's wrong? What happened at your dad's house? I set the folder down on the kitchen counter. We need to talk, I said. Emma, Jake, can you guys give your dad and me a few minutes? They both looked up, sensing the tension. Emma put down her phone. Mom, what's going on? Is everything okay? Just give us a few minutes, sweetie. I tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Everything's fine. We just need to talk. Emma and Jake exchanged worried glances but left the room. David pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. Ella, you're scaring me. What happened? I opened the folder and pulled out the letter, the photos, the bank statements. I laid them all out on the table like evidence at a trial. And then I told him everything. David listened without interrupting. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, confusion, before finally settling on something like resignation. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and ran his hands through his hair. Your father had another daughter, he said slowly, as if testing the words. For 38 years, he had another daughter he never mentioned. Yes. And you called her mother. Catherine. Yes. And now you're planning to go meet them tomorrow. Yes. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. Okay. Then I'm coming with you. You shouldn't have to do this alone. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since finding the letter. You don't have to. Ella, your world just got turned upside down. Your father wasn't who you thought he was. Your family history isn't what you believed. You're about to meet a sister you never knew existed. Yes, I'm coming with you. He squeezed my hand. We're in this together. That's what marriage means. I started crying then. Really crying, all the emotions I'd been holding in since I'd found that letter pouring out. David came around the table and pulled me into his arms, letting me sob against his chest while he rubbed my back and murmured soothing words. When I finally calmed down enough to breathe normally, he said, What are you going to do about the memorial service? I invited them, I said. Catherine and Sophie. I told them they should be there. That's brave, David said. It's also going to cause problems. You know that, right? Your extended family, your mom's relatives, they don't know about this. When Sophie shows up, let them be shocked. I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my voice. Dad's secret has been kept long enough. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. David looked at me with something like pride. Okay then. We tell the truth. But Ella, we need to be smart about this. We need to prepare for backlash. Some people are going to be angry. Some are going to blame you for airing your father's dirty laundry. Some are going to say you should have kept the secret buried with him. I don't care, I said, and I realized I meant it. I'm tired of lies. I'm tired of secrets. My father lived a double life and it hurt people. It hurt Catherine. It hurt Sophie. And it's hurting me now. The only way forward is truth. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about Sophie, imagining what she looked like now, how her life had unfolded. Did she resent her father? Did she hate him for keeping her hidden? Or had she understood? Had she accepted that some secrets were necessary to protect the people involved? And what about my mother? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that she must have known something. My parents had been married for 42 years. You don't spend that much time with someone and remain completely oblivious to their secrets. Maybe Mom had known and chosen to look the other way. Maybe that had been her way of coping, pretend the other life didn't exist, and maybe it would stop being real. But it was real. Sophie was real. And tomorrow I was going to meet her. The next morning David and I left early. We didn't tell the kids where we were going, just said we had some business to take care of related to Grandpa's estate. It wasn't entirely a lie. The drive to Portland took 3 hours, and we spent most of it in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Catherine's address led us to a modest apartment complex in a quiet neighborhood. The building was older but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a tidy front entrance. I parked the car and sat there for a moment trying to gather my courage. Ready? David asked gently. No, I said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. Catherine answered the door on the first knock, as if she'd been waiting by it. She was in her early 70s, I guessed, with short silver hair and kind eyes. She'd aged since the photo I'd seen at the county fair, but I could still see the woman my father had loved in her features. Ella, she said, and her voice was warm despite the circumstances. Come in. Please. The apartment was small but comfortable, filled with books and plants. I noticed photos on the walls, photos of a woman who looked like a middle-aged version of the teenage Sophie I'd seen in the letter. Photos of 2 young children elementary school age. Sophie's kids. My niece and nephew. Sophie isn't here, Catherine said, following my gaze. I called her last night and explained everything. She needs some time to process. This is a lot for her. It's a lot for all of us. I understand, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Maybe I'm moving too fast. Maybe I should have. No, Catherine interrupted. You did the right thing by calling. It's time. It's past time, really. Richard should have done this years ago, but he was too afraid. So it falls to you now to make things right. We sat down in her living room. David stayed close to my side, his presence a comfort. Catherine made tea and then she started talking. And what she told me changed everything I thought I knew about my father's story. I met Richard in 1969, Catherine began. I was 22, working as a secretary at an insurance company. He came in to do some accounting work for our office. He was charming and funny and he made me laugh. We started dating almost immediately. But my parents got married in 1970, I said. Catherine smiled sadly. Richard and I were engaged first. In the spring of 1970. He gave me a ring and we started planning a small wedding for that summer. But then I got pregnant. And Richard panicked. I felt my stomach drop. Pregnant? But Sophie wasn't born until 1971. I miscarried, Catherine said softly. In June of 1970. It was devastating for both of us, but especially for Richard. He'd been raised in a very traditional family. The idea that he'd gotten someone pregnant out of wedlock, even though we were engaged, it terrified him. He was convinced his parents would disown him, that the community would judge him, that his reputation would be ruined. So he left you, I said, the pieces starting to come together. Not immediately. At first, he said we needed to postpone the wedding while I recovered. Then he said maybe we should wait a bit longer, make sure we were really ready. And then one day he came to my apartment and told me he'd met someone else. Your mother. Margaret was her name, right? I nodded, my throat tight. He said Margaret was safe. She came from a good family, she was the kind of woman his parents would approve of. She didn't have any complications. Catherine's voice was bitter. That's what he called our lost baby. Complication. I was heartbroken. I told him he was making a mistake, that we loved each other, that we could work through anything. But he was determined. He married Margaret 2 weeks later. They eloped, I said. Mom always said it was romantic, that they just couldn't wait. Maybe that's what he told her too, Catherine said. But I think the truth is he rushed into it before he could change his mind. Before he could come back to me. But he did come back to you, David said. You had Sophie. Catherine nodded. About 6 months after Richard married Margaret, he showed up at my door. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said he loved me, that he'd never stopped loving me, that marrying Margaret had been the biggest error of his life. We started seeing each other again. I knew it was wrong. I knew he was married. But I loved him, and I convinced myself that he would eventually leave Margaret and come back to me for good. He never did though, I said. No, Catherine agreed. When I got pregnant with Sophie, I thought that would be the thing that finally made him choose me. But instead he begged me to keep it quiet. He said he'd support us financially, that he'd be part of Sophie's life, but that he couldn't leave Margaret. She was pregnant too, he said. With you. He couldn't abandon a pregnant wife. The timeline clicked into place. I was born in April 1971. Sophie was born in December 1970. My father had 2 daughters 5 months apart. 2 families he was juggling. 2 lives he was trying to live simultaneously. Did you ever tell him to choose? I asked. Did you ever give him an ultimatum? Many times, Catherine said. But Richard was skilled at making promises he never kept. He always had a reason why it wasn't the right time. Margaret was depressed. You were starting school. His parents were sick. There was always something. And I was weak. I kept believing him. I kept thinking that eventually he'd follow through. But he never did. No. And eventually I stopped asking. Sophie was growing up, and I didn't want her to spend her childhood waiting for a father who was never going to claim her. So I told Richard that he could be part of her life on my terms. He could visit occasionally. He could send money. He could see her on her birthday. But he couldn't promise her things he wouldn't deliver. And he couldn't confuse her by pretending he was going to leave his other family. Did Sophie know about me? I asked. About our father's other daughter? Yes, Catherine said. I told her when she was old enough to understand. I didn't want her growing up thinking her father's absence was because of something wrong with her. She needed to know he had another family, another life. She needed to know she was a secret, not because she wasn't good enough, but because her father was a coward. The word again. Coward. It seemed to be the theme of my father's story. How did she handle it? I asked. Growing up knowing she was someone's secret? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Not well at first. She was angry for a long time. She hated Richard for abandoning her. She hated me for letting him. And she hated you too, I'm sorry to say. She hated the daughter who got to have him full-time, who got to be acknowledged, who got to be legitimate. The words stung even though I understood them. I don't blame her, I said quietly. I'd feel the same way in her position. She's better now, Catherine continued. She went to therapy, worked through her anger. She built a good life for herself despite Richard's absence. She's successful and happy, and she has a family who loves her. But the wounds are still there. They've just scarred over. And now I'm here tearing open those scars, I said. No, Catherine said firmly. Richard tore them open when he decided to live a double life. You're just trying to clean up the mess he left behind. There's a difference. We talked for another 2 hours. Catherine told me stories about Sophie's childhood, about the times Dad had visited, about the birthdays he'd remembered and the ones he'd forgotten. She showed me more photos. Sophie at her high school graduation, Sophie on her wedding day, Sophie holding her first baby. All moments my father had missed or had only seen from a distance. Did he love her? I asked finally. Did Dad love Sophie? I think he did, Catherine said. In his own way. But Richard's love was always conditional, always limited by his fear of what other people would think. He loved Sophie, but not enough to claim her publicly. He loved me, but not enough to leave his wife. He was a man who wanted everything but was too afraid to actually reach for it. It was the most devastating portrait of my father I could have imagined. Not a villain but a coward. Not cruel but weak. A man who'd hurt people not out of malice but out of fear. I want to make this right, I said. I don't know how, but I want to try. Sophie deserves to be acknowledged. She deserves to be part of the family, not a secret tucked away in a desk drawer. That's very brave of you, Catherine said. But Ella, you need to understand that acknowledging Sophie publicly will have consequences. Your extended family, your father's friends, people in your community, they're going to judge him. They're going to judge all of us. Some people won't understand. Some will say terrible things. Let them, I said. I'm tired of protecting my father's reputation at the expense of the truth. Catherine smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her. You're stronger than Richard ever was, she said. Sophie is going to like you when she's ready to meet you. When do you think that will be? I asked. I don't know, Catherine admitted. She said she needs time. But I'll keep talking to her. Keep reminding her that you're not the enemy. Give her a few days. Maybe by the time of the memorial service, she'll be ready. David and I left Catherine's apartment late that afternoon. The drive home was quiet again. But this time it was a thoughtful silence rather than an anxious one. I kept thinking about everything Catherine had told me, trying to reconcile the father I'd known with the man she'd described. What are you thinking? David asked as we merged onto the highway. I'm thinking about all the times Dad told me he was proud of me, I said. All the times he said I was special, that I was his princess. I wonder if he said the same things to Sophie. I wonder if she got the same speeches about being strong and independent and capable. Does it matter? David asked gently. Whether he said the same things to both of you? It shouldn't, I admitted. But it does. I want to know if I was actually special to him, or if I was just the convenient daughter. The one he could claim without consequences. You were special to him, David said firmly. I saw the way he looked at you, Ella. That wasn't fake. He loved you. Maybe he loved Sophie too in a different way. Maybe he was capable of loving both of you, even if he was too cowardly to do it right. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think that my relationship with my father had been real and meaningful, not just a performance for the benefit of his carefully constructed public life. But how could I ever know for sure? When we got home, I called Marcus and filled him in on everything Catherine had told me. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he let out a long breath. So Uncle Richard was even worse than we thought, he said. He didn't just have an affair and a secret kid. He had a whole other relationship. He was essentially living two lives at once for decades. That's about the size of it, I agreed. And you still want to invite Sophie to the memorial service? More than ever, I said. She deserves to mourn him too. She deserves to be recognized as his daughter. It's the least I can do. Okay, Marcus said. Then I'm with you. Whatever happens, whatever people say, I've got your back. Over the next few days, I threw myself into preparing for the memorial service. I called the funeral home and increased the expected attendance. I ordered more flowers. I revised the program to include space for additional speakers. And I drafted a statement that I planned to read at the service, a statement that would introduce Sophie to everyone and explain the truth about my father's double life. I knew it would be a bomb. I knew it would shock people, maybe even anger some of them, but it felt like the right thing to do. The honorable thing. The thing my father should have done years ago. Catherine called me 3 days before the service. Sophie wants to meet you, she said. She's not ready for the big memorial service yet, but she'd like to have coffee with you beforehand. Just the two of you. She has questions. My heart leaped. When? Tomorrow if you're available. There's a cafe halfway between here and your town. Neutral ground. We arranged the meeting for noon the next day. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I would say, how I would introduce myself. What do you say to the sister you never knew existed? How do you bridge a gap that's been maintained for decades? The next day, I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I sat at a table by the window, ordered a coffee I couldn't drink, and watched every woman who walked by, wondering if it was her. And then she was there. I knew it immediately, even though we'd never met. She had Dad's eyes, his nose, his determined jawline. She was beautiful in a quiet way, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her dark curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked around the cafe, and when her eyes met mine, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that we were both here, both taking this terrifying step into unknown territory. "Ella," she said, approaching my table. "Sophie." I stood up, not sure whether to shake her hand or hug her. In the end, we did neither, just stood there awkwardly for a moment before sitting down. "You look like him," Sophie said. "Our father. You have his smile." "So do you," I said. "It's strange. Like looking in a funhouse mirror and seeing a version of myself I never knew existed." Sophie ordered a tea, and for a few minutes we made small talk about the weather, the cafe, anything but the elephant in the room. Then Sophie set down her cup and looked at me directly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," she said. "I've known about you my whole life. Richard's other daughter. The legitimate one. The one he chose to acknowledge. And I hated you for that. Even though I knew it wasn't your fault. I hated that you got to have a father and I got to have monthly visits and birthday cards." "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For existing? For being born into the family Sophie couldn't have? "I didn't know about you. If I had..." "What?" Sophie interrupted. "What would you have done? You were a child. It wasn't your responsibility to fix our father's mistakes. Just like it wasn't mine." "You're right," I said. "It was his responsibility. And he failed. He failed both of us." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "He did, didn't he? He failed by keeping me a secret. And he failed you by lying to you for your entire life. We both lost because of his cowardice." It was the same word Catherine had used. Coward. I was starting to realize it was the only word that really fit. "I want to change that," I said. "I can't undo the past, but I can try to make the future different. I want you to be part of my life, Sophie. Part of our family. I want your kids to know their cousins. I want us to be sisters, not just in biology but in real life." Sophie wiped her eyes. "That's a nice thought, Ella. But it's not that simple. You have a whole extended family who doesn't know I exist. When you tell them about me, some of them are going to be angry. Some are going to blame my mother for breaking up a marriage, even though Richard was the one who made all the choices. Some are going to see me as an embarrassment, a scandal. Are you really ready for that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Because the alternative is keeping Dad's secret, and I'm done with secrets. I'm done pretending my family was perfect when it clearly wasn't. You deserve to be acknowledged, Sophie. You deserve to be seen." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay. I'll come to the memorial service. I'll let you introduce me as Richard's daughter. But Ella, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a family to replace the one I never had. I have a good life. I have people who love me. I'm doing this because I think it's time for the truth too. But I can't promise we're going to have some fairy tale reconciliation where we become instant best friends. I don't expect that," I said. "I just want the chance to know you. That's all." We talked for another hour, sharing stories about our childhoods, about Dad, about the different ways we'd experienced him as a father. Sophie told me about the times Dad had visited, always staying in a hotel, always keeping things formal and brief. She told me about the college fund he'd set up for her, the way he'd helped her buy her first car, the phone calls on Christmas morning that had to be short because he had to get back to his real family. And I told her about the father I'd known. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up late helping me with school projects, who'd been at every recital and every parent-teacher conference. The man who'd seemed devoted and present, never giving any indication that he had another life 3 hours away. "It's like we had two different fathers," Sophie said. "Except they were the same person, just showing different sides to different people. Which version was real?" I wondered aloud. Or were they both real, and Dad was just good at compartmentalizing? "I don't think we'll ever know," Sophie said. "He's gone now. We only have the pieces he left behind." Before we parted ways, Sophie gave me her phone number, and made me promise to send her details about the memorial service. She also asked if she could bring her husband for moral support, and I immediately agreed. "Thank you," she said as we stood up to leave, "for finding me, for reaching out. It took courage." "You're my sister," I said simply. "That's worth being brave for." The day of the memorial service arrived faster than I expected. The funeral home was crowded with people who'd known Dad, colleagues from his accounting firm, members of his church, neighbors, family members. Marcus and I had worked hard to create a fitting tribute, with photo displays showing Dad throughout his life. But I deliberately left one section of the display empty, waiting. Sophie arrived 30 minutes before the service was scheduled to start. She brought her husband, a kind-looking man named Patrick, and they both looked nervous. I introduced them to David and Marcus, and then I showed Sophie the empty section of the photo display. "I was hoping you might have some photos to add," I said. "Pictures of Dad with you or pictures from your life that you'd like to include. He was your father too. You should be represented here." Sophie pulled out her phone and showed me several photos she'd saved. Dad at Sophie's high school graduation. Dad holding Sophie's oldest child as a newborn. Dad standing next to Sophie in front of her house, both of them smiling. I printed them out using the funeral home's printer and added them to the display. The juxtaposition was jarring. On one side of the display, photos of Dad with me, with Mom, with our extended family. On the other side, photos of Dad with Sophie, with Catherine, with a whole other life. It was visual proof of the double life he'd led. People started arriving, and I could see them doing double takes as they looked at the photos. I could hear whispers starting, people asking questions, pointing at the pictures with Sophie. My Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, came up to me with a confused expression. "Ella, honey, who's that woman in the photos with your father?" "That's Sophie," I said clearly, loudly enough that several people nearby could hear. "She's my sister. Dad's other daughter." The whispers exploded into full conversations. People were staring now, some shocked, some curious, some clearly disapproving. I saw my cousin Sarah's mouth fall open. I saw my Uncle Tom's face go red with what looked like anger. Marcus appeared at my side. "You sure you want to do this?" he murmured. "Too late to back out now," I said. The service began, and I took my place at the front of the room. I'd been asked to give the main eulogy, and I'd spent hours crafting it, revising it, making sure it struck the right tone. Now, looking out at the crowd, at Sophie sitting in the third row next to her husband, at all the confused and curious faces, I knew I couldn't give the speech I'd written. I needed to tell the truth. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "We're here today to remember Richard Morrison, my father. And I want to start by introducing someone who should have been introduced to you all a long time ago. Sophie Miller Patterson, would you please stand?" Sophie stood slowly, her face pale but determined. "Sophie is my sister," I continued. "She's Richard Morrison's daughter. She was born in December of 1970, and our father was part of her life for over 40 years. But because of choices Dad made, choices based on fear and shame and a desire to maintain appearances, Sophie was kept a secret. She was hidden from us and we were hidden from her. And that was wrong. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Everyone was staring at Sophie now, and at me, and I could see the range of emotions playing across their faces. Shock, judgment, compassion, confusion. "I found out about Sophie when I was cleaning out Dad's desk after he passed away," I said. "I discovered letters, photos, bank statements, evidence of an entire life my father had been living in secret. And my first instinct was to hide it, to protect Dad's reputation, to keep the family peace. But then I realized that doing so would be continuing the lie. It would be telling Sophie that she still doesn't deserve to be acknowledged. And I couldn't do that." I looked directly at Sophie. She had tears streaming down her face, but she was nodding at me, encouraging me to continue. "My father was a good man in many ways," I said. "He was kind, generous, hardworking. He helped people, contributed to the community, made a positive impact on many lives. But he was also a flawed man. He made choices that hurt people he loved. He lived a double life for decades, and in doing so, he denied Sophie the right to be recognized as his daughter. He denied me the right to know I had a sister. And he denied all of you the right to know the full truth about who he was." I paused, taking a breath. I'm not here to destroy my father's memory. I'm here to tell the complete story, the good and the bad. Because that's what honesty requires. And because Sophie deserves better than to be a secret hidden in a desk drawer. She deserves to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be welcomed into this family as the sister she's always been. I sat down. The room was silent for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not everyone, some people were still sitting with their arms crossed, clearly disapproving, but enough. Marcus was clapping. David was clapping. And in the front row, Catherine was clapping, tears streaming down her face. The rest of the service proceeded more normally. Other people got up to share memories of Dad, most of them glossing over the revelation I just dropped. But I noticed that several people made it a point to go over to Sophie after the service ended, to introduce themselves, to welcome her. Not everyone was kind. My Aunt Linda pulled me aside afterwards and said in a tight voice, "That was inappropriate, Ella. Airing your father's private business in public like that. Your mother would be mortified." "My mother deserved to know the truth too," I said. "Maybe if Dad had been honest from the beginning, everyone would have been happier." "You've embarrassed the family," Linda hissed. "For what?" "To make yourself feel righteous. To give Sophie what she deserves," I said firmly. "Recognition. Acceptance. Place in this family. If you can't understand that, then I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for doing what's right." Linda walked away, her back stiff with disapproval. But I didn't care. I'd done what I needed to do. Sophie approached me as people were starting to leave. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. "Thank you," she said. "No one has ever stood up for me like that before. Not even my own mother, really. She always told me to accept the situation, to be grateful for what I had. But you demanded that I be seen. That means more than you know." "You're my sister," I said, and this time I did hug her. She hugged me back, and for a moment, I felt something settle in my chest. A rightness. Like pieces that had been scattered for decades were finally coming together. Over the next few weeks, the aftermath of my revelation rippled through the family. Some relatives stopped speaking to me. Others reached out to express support. My father's closest friend, a man named George who'd known him for 30 years, called me and admitted that he'd suspected Dad was having an affair, but had never imagined there was a child involved. He apologized for never asking questions, for enabling Dad's deception through his silence. The most difficult conversation came from my own children. Emma and Jake had heard whispers at the memorial service, and they'd come home with questions. David and I sat them down and explained everything. That Grandpa had another daughter, that they had an aunt they'd never met. That family was more complicated than they'd realized. "Was Grandpa a bad person?" Jake asked, his 13-year-old mind trying to process the moral complexity of it all. "Grandpa was a person who made bad choices," I said carefully. "He loved us, and I believe he loved Sophie too. But he was afraid of what people would think, so he kept part of his life hidden. That hurt people. It doesn't make him all bad, but it doesn't excuse what he did either." Emma, who was more perceptive at 16, asked, "Are you going to stay in touch with Sophie? Like, is she going to be part of our family now?" "I hope so," I said. "If she wants to be. That's up to her." Sophie did want to be. She started coming to family dinners at our house, bringing Patrick and their children. At first it was awkward. We were strangers trying to build a relationship that should have existed all along. But gradually we found our rhythm. Sophie and I discovered we both loved old movies and terrible puns. Our kids bonded over video games and music. Patrick and David became fishing buddies. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when old resentment surfaced, when Sophie would make a comment about how I'd had the easy childhood and I'd have to bite back a defensive response. There were family gatherings where Sophie felt like an outsider, where the decades of history I shared with our extended family highlighted everything she'd missed. But we worked at it. We talked about our feelings. We went to family therapy together. Something I'd suggested after a particularly difficult Thanksgiving, where Sophie had a breakdown about feeling like she didn't belong. The therapist helped us understand that we were both grieving the relationship we'd never gotten to have, and that building a new relationship would take time and patience. 6 months after the memorial service, I made a decision that I knew would be my final statement on the matter. Dad's house, the one he'd left to me in his will, had been sitting empty since his death. I'd been unable to decide what to do with it. Sell it, rent it out, keep it as some kind of shrine to the father I thought I'd known. But one evening, as Sophie and I were having coffee at my kitchen table, she mentioned that she and Patrick had been looking for a house closer to our town. Their apartment lease was ending, and they wanted their kids to have more space, to be in a better school district. What about Dad's house? I said suddenly. Sophie looked at me confused. What about it? Move into it. You and Patrick and the kids. It should be yours too. Dad left it to me, but that's only because he didn't have the courage to acknowledge you in his will. So I'm acknowledging you now. The house should be shared. Ella, I can't accept that, Sophie said, but I could see the longing in her eyes. That house is worth a fortune. Your father left it to you. You've earned it, taking care of him all those years. And you earned it by being his daughter even when he wouldn't claim you publicly, I countered. Please, Sophie. Let me do this. Let me give you what Dad should have given you all along. We compromised. I transferred half ownership of the house to Sophie. We would share it equally, both our names on the deed. She and Patrick would live there and pay the property taxes and maintenance, and someday when the time came to sell it, we'd split the proceeds. The day Sophie moved into Dad's house, I stood in the driveway watching the moving truck unload furniture. Catherine was there too. She'd driven down to help Sophie settle in. Marcus came by with his tools to help hang pictures. David brought pizza for everyone. My kids ran around the yard with Sophie's kids, claiming bedrooms and planning sleepovers. Richard would have loved to see this, Catherine said quietly, standing next to me. All of you together. His family finally united. Then he should have made it happen when he was alive, I said, but without bitterness. I'd moved past anger into something more like sadness. Sadness for all the years we'd lost, for all the moments that could have been if Dad had just been braver. You're giving Sophie something precious, Catherine continued. Not just the house. You're giving her legitimacy, a place in the family narrative. That's worth more than any amount of money. She was right. Over the following months I watched Sophie transform. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of being a secret. She started sharing stories about Dad at family gatherings, adding her perspective to the collective memory. She brought photos from her childhood to add to the family albums. She introduced her children to their extended family with pride rather than shame. And slowly, most of the family accepted her. There were still holdouts. Aunt Linda never did warm up to Sophie, and a few of Dad's old friends made it clear they thought I'd betrayed his memory. But the majority of people came around. They saw that Sophie was kind, intelligent, and gracious. They saw that her children were delightful. And they saw that including her in the family made us all stronger, not weaker. 1 year after I'd found the letter in Dad's desk, Sophie and I stood together at our parents' graves. Mom and Dad were buried side by side in the town cemetery, under a large oak tree. Sophie had never visited before. She'd never felt she had the right. I used to drive by here sometimes, Sophie admitted. After Richard died, before you found me, I'd look at the graves from the road and wonder if I should stop, if I should acknowledge him somehow. But I always drove on. I figured even in death, I wasn't supposed to intrude on his real family. You are his real family, I said firmly. Just as much as I am. And you have every right to be here. We stood in silence for a moment, looking at Dad's headstone. It was simple, just his name and dates and the words beloved father and husband. The engraving suddenly seemed inadequate, incomplete. Do you hate him? Sophie asked. For lying to you all those years? I considered the question. Sometimes, I admitted. Sometimes I'm furious at him for putting me in this position, for making me the one who had to fix his mistakes. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad that he was so afraid of judgment that he denied himself the chance to have both his daughters in his life openly. Sad that he died without ever making it right. I feel the same way, Sophie said. I wanted to hate him. I spent years hating him. But now that I know you, now that I see what he missed out on by keeping us apart, I just feel sorry for him. He cheated himself as much as he cheated us. We laid flowers on both graves, Mom's and Dad's. Sophie had brought white roses, Mom's favorite. I hadn't told her that, but somehow she'd known. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. Either way, it felt right. As we walked back to our cars, Sophie said, "Thank you, Ella, for everything. For finding me, for standing up for me, for making space for me in your life. I know it hasn't been easy. You're my sister," I said, as I'd said so many times over the past year. "That's what sisters do." "I never had a sister before," Sophie said, smiling through tears. "I like it." "Me too," I said. And I meant it. The following months brought more integration and healing. Sophie's children started calling me Aunt Ella, a title that filled me with unexpected joy. Emma and Sophie's daughter Madison became inseparable, discovering they shared a passion for art. Jake found a role model in Sophie's son Tyler, who was teaching him guitar. We established new family traditions that included everyone. Sunday dinners rotated between my house and Dad's old house, where Sophie now lived. Holidays were planned together, with Sophie's family having equal input. We created new photo albums that documented our combined family, filling in the gaps that Dad's secrecy had created. The hardest moment came when we had to tell Sophie's children the full truth about their grandfather. Madison was 12 and Tyler was 9, old enough to understand that their grandfather had kept their mother a secret for most of her life. They struggled with it, asking questions that didn't have easy answers. "Why didn't Grandpa Richard want people to know about Mom?" Madison asked during one particularly difficult conversation. "He did want people to know," Sophie said gently. "He just wasn't brave enough to make it happen." Sometimes adults make bad choices because they're afraid. Your grandpa was afraid of what people would think, so he kept secrets. And those secrets hurt people. "But he still loved you, right?" Tyler asked, his young face anxious. "Yes," Sophie said. "He loved me. I'm sure of that. He just didn't love me enough to be brave. And that's something I've had to learn to live with." These conversations were painful, but they were also necessary. I wanted our children to learn from Dad's mistakes, to understand that love without courage is incomplete, that secrets always hurt more people than they protect. As the second anniversary of Dad's death approached, Sophie suggested we do something to honor both the father we'd known and the truth we now understood. She proposed we create a scholarship in his name at the local community college, specifically for students who came from non-traditional families or who'd overcome difficult circumstances. "Richard made mistakes," Sophie said, "but he also believed in education. He made sure I could go to college even if he had to do it secretly. Maybe we can take that one good thing he did and make it bigger, help other people who come from complicated situations." I loved the idea. We worked together to establish the Richard Morrison Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students. We funded it partially from the money in Dad's secret account, the account he'd used to support Sophie all those years, and partially from donations we collected from family members who wanted to be part of healing the family's wounds. At the scholarship's inaugural event, both Sophie and I spoke. I talked about the importance of education and opportunity, values my father had instilled in me. Sophie talked about the power of truth and the courage it takes to acknowledge difficult family histories. Together, we presented the first scholarship to a young woman who was the first in her family to attend college, whose mother had raised her alone after her father left. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives about family, truth, and finding healing in unexpected places. Watching that young woman accept the scholarship, seeing the pride and hope in her face, I felt something shift inside me. Dad's legacy didn't have to be defined solely by his mistakes. Yes, he'd been a coward. Yes, he'd hurt people through his deception. But from that pain, Sophie and I were creating something positive. We were using his failure as a catalyst for change, for openness, for supporting others who came from complicated family situations. Not everyone in the extended family supported our efforts. Aunt Linda refused to contribute to the scholarship fund, saying it was rewarding bad behavior. A few of Dad's old colleagues questioned whether it was appropriate to name a scholarship after someone whose moral character was now in question. But most people saw it for what it was, an attempt to find redemption in a difficult situation, to create good from pain. The scholarship fund grew, supported by people who appreciated the honesty Sophie and I had brought to the family narrative. 3 years after I found the letter, Sophie called me with unexpected news. She'd been contacted by a genealogy company. Someone doing DNA testing had come up as a match to her. A half-sister. My stomach dropped. Another one? I asked. Dad had another daughter? No, Sophie said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Not Dad. My mother. Catherine. Apparently, I have a half-sister from before she met Richard. Mom gave her up for adoption when she was 17. She never told me. Never told anyone, apparently. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Catherine, who'd been the victim of Richard's secrecy, had been keeping her own secret all along. Another daughter, given up for adoption, hidden away just like Sophie had been hidden. How does your mom feel about it? I asked. Shocked. Scared. Hopeful, Sophie said. The same way I felt when you first called me. It's strange, isn't it? How these patterns repeat themselves. Secrets breeding more secrets. Are you going to reach out to her? This half-sister. Yes, Sophie said without hesitation. I learned from you, Ella. I learned that keeping secrets only makes things worse. This woman, her name is Rebecca. She deserves to know her biological family. Just like I deserved to know mine. Rebecca joined our expanding family 6 months later. She was 58 years old, had grown up in Oregon with adoptive parents who'd loved her deeply, and had only started searching for her biological family after her adoptive mother passed away. Meeting Catherine was emotional for both of them, a reunion neither had expected to have. And Rebecca fit into our family like she'd always been there. She was warm, funny, and remarkably forgiving of the circumstances of her adoption. She'd had a good life, she said, and she didn't blame Catherine for the choice she'd made as a scared teenager. Watching Sophie and Rebecca bond as sisters, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This is what family should be, I thought. Open, honest, accepting. Not perfect but real. Not hiding the difficult parts but embracing them as part of the whole story. Our family gatherings now included a wildly diverse group. Me and Marcus, who'd grown up as Dad's children. Sophie, Dad's secret daughter. Rebecca, Catherine's secret daughter. Our spouses, our children, our extended family members who'd chosen to accept the new reality. We were a family built not on the traditional model but on truth and choice. One evening, about 4 years after I'd found the letter, Sophie and I were sitting on the porch of Dad's old house, her house now. Our children were inside playing board games. David and Patrick were grilling in the backyard. Catherine and Rebecca were in the kitchen making dessert. It was an ordinary family evening, the kind that happens thousands of times in thousands of homes. Except it wasn't ordinary. It was extraordinary. Because it was happening despite decades of secrecy and pain. It was happening because I'd made a choice to pursue truth instead of comfort, connection instead of convenience. Do you ever regret it? Sophie asked, echoing my thoughts. Telling everyone about me? It would have been easier to just keep Dad's secret. Never, I said honestly. Well, maybe once or twice when Aunt Linda was being particularly awful. But no, overall I've never regretted it. Finding you was the best thing that came out of Dad's death. Even though it meant learning your father wasn't who you thought he was? Especially because of that, I said. I learned that people are complicated. That good people can make terrible choices. That love can coexist with cowardice. And I learned that secrets always cost more than they save. Those are valuable lessons. Sophie reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you found that letter, she said. I'm glad you were brave enough to call me. I'm glad you stood up at that memorial service and made people see me. You gave me something I'd never had before, legitimacy. A place in the world that wasn't hidden or shameful. You gave me something too, I said. A sister. A real relationship, not based on some idealized version of family, but on choice and honesty in work. That's worth more than any inheritance Dad could have left me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of our family inside. The laughter, the playful arguing, the normalcy of it all. This was what Dad had been too afraid to create. This was what we'd built in spite of him. Mom would have liked you, I said suddenly. If she'd known about you, I think she would have understood. Maybe she even did know, and she chose to stay anyway. Maybe she was braver than any of us gave her credit for. Maybe, Sophie said. Or maybe she was trapped by the same fear that trapped Richard. Fear of what people would think, fear of judgment, fear of having to admit that her marriage wasn't perfect. Fear is powerful, I agreed. It makes people do terrible things, keep terrible secrets, hurt the people they love. But love is more powerful. Or at least it should be. Is that what you tell your students? Sophie asked, smiling. Life lessons from art teacher Ella? Sometimes, I admitted. I use our story as an example sometimes. Obviously, I don't give all the details, but I talk about how family can be complicated, how people make mistakes, how the most important thing is to keep trying, keep being honest, keep showing up for each other. Do they get it? The kids. Some do. Some are dealing with their own family complications. Some come from divorced families or blended families, or families with secrets of their own. They understand that normal is just a setting on a washing machine. Real families are messy and complicated and sometimes broken. But that doesn't mean they're not worth fighting for. Inside the house, we heard a burst of laughter. Tyler had apparently won whatever game they were playing, and he was celebrating with typical 9-year-old enthusiasm. Madison was protesting that he'd cheated, while Emma and Jake were calling for a rematch. Listen to them, Sophie said. Our kids. Growing up as cousins like they always should have. They'll never have to experience what we went through, being kept separate, being denied a relationship because of adult mistakes. They'll grow up knowing the truth, knowing each other, knowing that family is about more than just biology. That's our legacy, I said. That's what we're giving them. Not the house, not the money, not the scholarship fund, though those things matter too. But the real gift is honesty. Connection. The knowledge that secrets are poison and truth, however painful, is always better in the long run. Sophie stood up and stretched. Come on, sister. Let's go inside and destroy our children at board games. I'm feeling competitive tonight. I laughed and followed her into the house. Into the warmth and light and noise of family. Into the life we'd built from the ashes of Dad's secrets. 5 years after I found the letter, I received an unexpected package in the mail. It was from an attorney's office I didn't recognize, and inside was a letter and a small notebook. The letter explained that the attorney had been holding the package per Richard Morrison's instructions. It was to be delivered to me 5 years after his death, assuming I was still at the same address. If not, the attorney had instructions to track me down. My hands were shaking as I opened the notebook. It was Dad's handwriting, page after page of it. A letter to me, written during the final weeks of his life. Dear Ella, it began. If you're reading this, then you found out about Sophie. I'm sorry you had to discover it the way you did, going through my things after I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you myself while I was alive. That was cowardly of me. But then I've been a coward for most of my life in the ways that mattered most. I had to stop reading. My eyes were blurring with tears. Dad had known. He'd known I would find out. He'd planned for it. I took a breath and continued reading. I've spent the last few months thinking about what to tell you, how to explain the choices I made. But the truth is, there is no good explanation. I was young and scared when I met Catherine. When she got pregnant the first time and then miscarried, I panicked. I ran to your mother because she felt safe, uncomplicated. I married her quickly, thinking I could put Catherine behind me. But I couldn't. I loved Catherine. I'd always loved her. When she came back into my life, when she told me she was pregnant again with Sophie, I should have left your mother and done the right thing. But by then, your mother was pregnant with you. And I was already established in the community, had a reputation to maintain. So I made the choice to keep both lives separate. That choice haunted me every day for 40 years. Every time I looked at you, Ella, I thought about Sophie. Every time I visited Sophie, I thought about you. I loved you both so much. And I hurt you both so deeply by never having the courage to bring you together. I know you've probably found Sophie by now. I know you, Ella, you're too good, too honest to keep a secret like that. You'll have reached out to her. You'll have tried to make things right. I hope she forgave you for having the father she couldn't have. I hope you forgave me for lying to you all these years. If you've done what I think you've done, if you've brought Sophie into the family, if you've given her the recognition I was too cowardly to give her, then you've done what I should have done decades ago. You've been braver than I ever was. And I'm so proud of you for that. I'm leaving you the house not because you earned it through caretaking, though you did. I'm leaving it to you because I'm hoping you'll do what I never could. Share it with Sophie. Make it a place where both of you belong. Make it a symbol of the family unity I failed to create. Tell Sophie I loved her. Tell her I'm sorry I wasn't the father she deserved. Tell her that keeping her secret was the greatest regret of my life, and that if I could do it all over again, I'd do it differently. I'd be brave. I'd claim both my daughters proudly and let the world judge me as it would. But I can't do it over. I can only hope that you, Ella, with your kind heart and your fierce sense of justice, will do what I failed to do. Unite the family. Tell the truth. Make something good come from my mistakes. I love you, Ella. I always have. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you believed I was. But I hope in the end my failures taught you something valuable. I hope they taught you to be brave. To choose truth over comfort. To value people over reputation. Be the person I couldn't be. Love both your families, the one you were born into and the one you're creating. And please, please tell Sophie that her father loved her, even if he loved her like a coward. All my love, Dad. I sat at my kitchen table and cried. For my father, for his weakness, for his regret. For Sophie, who deserved better. For myself, for the father I'd lost twice. Once to death, once to truth. For all the years we'd wasted. All the moments we could have shared if he'd just been braver. But I also cried with relief. Because Dad had known. He'd understood his mistakes. He'd hoped I would fix them. And I had. I'd done exactly what he'd wanted. What he'd been too afraid to do himself. I called Sophie immediately. Dad left me a letter, I said when she answered. A confession. An apology. Instructions. What kind of instructions? Sophie asked. He wanted me to find you. To bring you into the family. To share the house with you. He planned for all of this. He knew what would happen when I found the letter in his desk. There was a long silence. Then Sophie said, so even his confession was cowardly. Even his apology had to wait until after he was dead. Until he couldn't face the consequences. Yes, I admitted. Even then he was a coward. But Sophie, he loved you. He wrote that. He said keeping you secret was his greatest regret. He wanted you to know that. Another silence. Then, can I read it? The letter. Of course. Come over tonight. We'll read it together. That evening, Sophie and I sat in my living room and read Dad's confession together. She cried when she got to the part where he said he loved her. She got angry at the parts where he made excuses. She laughed bitterly when he talked about reputation and community judgment. He still doesn't really take responsibility, Sophie said when she finished. He talks about being scared, about being young, about circumstances. But he doesn't say, I chose this. I chose to hurt people. He makes it sound like it all just happened to him. You're right, I said. Dad was good at deflecting, even in death. But Sophie, he did acknowledge his mistakes. He did express regret. That's more than we had before. Is it enough? Sophie asked. Does this letter make up for 40 years of being hidden? No, I said honestly. Nothing could make up for that. But it's something. It's proof that he knew he was wrong. It's proof that he thought about you, cared about you, wanted better for you. Sophie folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. Keep it safe, she said. Maybe someday I'll want to read it again. Maybe someday it'll hurt less. But right now I just feel tired. Tired of dealing with Richard Morrison's emotional complications, even from beyond the grave. I understand, I said. And Sophie, you don't owe him forgiveness. You don't owe him anything. If you want to be angry at him forever, that's your right. I know, Sophie said. But I don't want to be angry forever. I want to let it go. Not for him, but for me. For my kids. For the life I'm building now. The life that includes you and Marcus and our expanding, complicated, honest family. She stood up to leave and I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned and hugged me tightly. Thank you, she said. For everything. For finding me, for fighting for me. For sharing Dad's last letter with me. For being the sister I always needed. Thank you for giving me the chance, I said. For letting me into your life despite everything. For being patient with me while I figured out how to be a sister. After she left, I put Dad's letter in a fireproof box with all the other important documents. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, the deed to the house that now had both our names on it. Evidence of our family, in all its complicated, messy, honest glory. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect, no family is perfect, but good. Real. Honest. Sophie and I grew closer, our relationship deepening from obligation to genuine friendship. Our children became true cousins, spending summers together, supporting each other through teenage dramas and college applications. Catherine became a beloved grandmother figure to all the kids, including mine. She taught them to bake, told them stories about their grandfather that filled in gaps we didn't know existed. Rebecca became Aunt Becky, a fixture at holidays and birthdays. We celebrated Sophie's 50th birthday with a huge party that included everyone. Her friends from work, her kids' friends, Catherine, Rebecca, our side of the family. At one point during the party, Sophie pulled me aside and said, "You know what the best gift is? Not the party, not the presents. It's this. Having a family that's not ashamed of me. Having a place where I belong." Marcus, who'd been standing nearby, joined us. "To complicated families," he said, raising his glass, "may we always choose truth over comfort." "To complicated families," Sophie and I echoed, clinking our glasses against his. 10 years after I found the letter, our combined family had grown even more. Emma had graduated college and was working as a graphic designer in Seattle. Jake was in his sophomore year at the State University studying engineering. Madison was at Portland State, her mother's alma mater, studying education. Tyler was in high school, already talking about following his mother into mathematics. Sophie and I had expanded the scholarship fund, adding new categories and helping dozens of students pursue their dreams. We'd written articles about our story, sharing it with others who were dealing with complicated family situations. We'd become advocates for family therapy, for honesty, for choosing courage over convenience. And through it all, we never forgot where we started. That letter in Dad's desk. That phone call I made with shaking hands. That memorial service where I stood up and told the truth. One spring day, Sophie and I returned to the cemetery where our parents were buried. We'd commissioned a new stone, one that told the complete story. It read, "Richard Morrison, 1948 to 2020. Father of Ella and Sophie. Beloved despite his mistakes. Forgiven because of love. Do you think he would have liked it?" Sophie asked, looking at the new stone. "I think he would have been relieved," I said. "To finally have both his daughters acknowledged. To have the secret finally, completely out in the open." "Are you glad you found the letter?" Sophie asked. "Knowing everything you know now, all the complications it caused, would you still want to have found it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because finding that letter led me to you. And you, Sophie, you're one of the best things that ever happened to me. Even though I'm a reminder of Dad's betrayal? You're not a reminder of betrayal," I said firmly. "You're proof of love. Complicated, messy, imperfect love. But love nonetheless. Dad loved your mother enough to stay in her life for 40 years. He loved you enough to support you, to follow your progress, to keep your photo in his desk where he could see it every day. Was it enough? No. Should he have done more? Absolutely. But it was something. And from that something we built this. Our family." Sophie wiped tears from her eyes. "I used to dream about having a sister when I was little. Someone to share secrets with, someone who would understand me, someone who would always be on my side. I thought that dream died when I realized I was the secret, that I was the thing that couldn't be acknowledged. But you gave me that dream back, Ella. You gave me the sister I always wanted." We stood together at our father's grave. 2 daughters united by genetics and divided by circumstances, brought back together by choice and courage. Behind us, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. "Ready to go?" I asked eventually. "Almost," Sophie said. She knelt and placed flowers on Dad's grave, then on Mom's. "Goodbye, Richard," she said softly. "Thank you for loving me, even if you did it badly. Thank you for leading Ella to me. Thank you for teaching us through your mistakes how to be better, how to be braver." As we walked back to our cars, our arms linked together, I thought about the journey we'd taken. From strangers to sisters. From secrets to truth. From shame to pride. It hadn't been easy. There had been pain and anger and difficult conversations. There had been people who judged us, who turned away, who chose comfort over truth. But there had also been love. Acceptance. Growth. Healing. We'd taken a family secret and turned it into a family strength. We'd taken a hidden daughter and made her visible, valued, celebrated. My father had been a coward. That was the truth, and I would never deny it. He'd made choices that hurt people, choices that prioritized his comfort over his integrity. He'd lived a lie for decades, and that lie had caused immeasurable pain. But from his cowardice I'd learned courage. From his secrets I'd learned the value of truth. From his mistakes I'd learned how to do better. And most importantly, from the letter he'd hidden in his desk, I'd gained a sister, a friend, an ally in navigating life's complexities. That letter had changed our family forever. But not in the way Dad had feared. It hadn't destroyed us. It had rebuilt us stronger and more honest than before. It had given us permission to be imperfect, to acknowledge our complications, to choose truth over appearances. And in the end, that was the greatest gift my father could have given me. Not the house, not the inheritance, but the opportunity to be brave, to stand up for what was right, to honor family not by hiding its flaws, but by embracing them and choosing to love anyway. Sophie and I made plans for dinner the following week as we stood by our cars. Her family and mine, gathered around a table, sharing food and stories and laughter. It was so ordinary now, these family dinners, but I never took them for granted. I remembered the years when they weren't possible, when Sophie was a secret and I was ignorant of her existence. "Love you, sister," Sophie said as she got in her car. "Love you too," I replied. I watched her drive away, then got in my own car and headed home. Home to David, who'd supported me through every step of this journey. Home to my children, who'd learned that family could be complicated and still be loving. Home to the life I'd built on a foundation of truth rather than comfortable lies. The letter in my father's desk had changed everything. It had shattered the illusion of the perfect family I thought I had. It had revealed uncomfortable truths and forced me to make difficult choices. It had tested my courage and my capacity for forgiveness. But it had also given me something precious. A sister. A larger family. A deeper understanding of what it means to love imperfect people. And the knowledge that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the rightest thing to do. My father had been too afraid to unite his daughters in life, so I did it for him in death. And in doing so, I honored not who he was but who he should have been. Who I was determined to be. Brave. Honest. True. That was the legacy I was building. That was what I would pass on to my children and to Sophie's children. Not secrets and shame but courage and truth. The letter in my father's desk had changed our family forever. And I would never ever regret finding it.